Hi, before we begin, I need some feedback on the slides. Is anyone having trouble printing them out? And if you are, please specify the problem. I've been really hesitant to make the slides too fancy because I don't know how that'll affect your printing. If you have beef with my slides, this is your chance to vent, so get it out of your system. Please drop me an email to let me know. Chapter 11, Cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are made up of molecules that act on cannabinoid receptors in the nervous system and the body. Our body actually makes a form of cannabinoid and it's called endocannabinoid. And we have what's called an endocannabinoid system, which is a network of receptors that interact with cannabinoids. There are phytocannabinoids, which you're more familiar with, and these are the ones that are found in cannabis plants. This is where the THC, CBD, and CBN come from. Then, like with most other drugs, there are synthetic versions of cannabinoids, and they are called synthetic cannabinoids. They're completely lab created. They bind to the same receptors as cannabinoids in cannabis. While they mimic the effects of cannabis, they're not the safest because they cause adverse side effects, agitation, confusion, vomiting, hallucinations, things like that. Not the good kind of side effects. Phytocannabinoid compounds. So I'm always thinking of more efficient ways to help you learn the information. So I tend to add info as I'm recording the video. You'll notice that the next few slides have been reorganized, just to give you a heads up. So there are two types of THC, delta 9 and delta 8. THC is short for tetrahydrocannabinol. We're just going to call it THC. This is the key psychoactive substance that produces the intoxicating effects known as the high. It acts on the CB1 receptors, which are mainly found in the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. Cannabinol is less psychoactive than THC and it produces more sedative effects. It also acts on the CB1 receptor. Cannabidiol, CBD, I originally said that this was a non-psychoactive, but technically anything that affects the mind is considered psychoactive. That's the definition. Some studies have shown that CBD helps with cognitive functioning in some sort of way. Okay, just to clarify, CBD is psychoactive. It doesn't produce a high, so it's not intoxicating. So no one's getting high from CBD. There's a zero chance of addiction. The structure of CBD is completely different from THC, so it can't bind to the same receptors as THC. So the receptors that THC is binding to is what's helping cause the high. CBD can't bind to those receptors. They can't do the same thing. It has more sedative and pain relieving properties, so it can actually counterbalance THC's effects if they're used together. These videos are really helpful to understand what CBD is. There are also alchemides which have different functions and help the body fights diseases and stuff. And then there are beta carotene, which offers non-steroidal pain relief and inflammation reducing properties. Cannabis plants. There are three types of main plants that weed comes from and are used for their cannabinoids. They include Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. So sativa has the highest amount of THC. This is the preferred plant for weed. It does contain CBD, but lower than THC and low CBN. Sativa produces more stimulating effects and helps improve attention, helps with energy, relieves depression, pain, and increases serotonin. Cannabis indica has lower THC and higher CBD, which means that it produces less intoxication, so less high and more sedative effects. So cannabis sativa, which is weed, the weed plant, has the highest THC. Indica has lower THC, so it would help with muscle relaxation, nausea relief, increase in appetite, and increase in dopamine. Ruderalis is high in CBD and has the lowest amount of THC compared to the other ones. It's the fastest growing in autoflowers, so it basically grows like a weed. And since the other two don't grow as fast and are harder to produce, sometimes cannabis ruderalis is hybrided with the other two so that they can harvest better and faster. Some things to know about the cannabis plants, the different parts. So trichomes are found on the leaves of plants. They look like little hairs which have glands that release resin that contain the cannabinoid compounds. This is where THC is the most abundant in these little hair-like structures. Hemp as defined as the parts of the cannabis sativa plant that contains less than 0.3% of THC, which means nobody is smoking hemp to get high. Okay? It's used more to make things like ropey materials, bags, clothes. It's put in food, things like that. So hemp comes off of the same plant, but they just have to make sure it's the part of the plant that does not have the highest THC. Marijuana is weed, whatever you want to call it, is just using the flowering parts of the plant. The leaves and the stems, the budding. It's the parts with the highest levels of THC, which is why it's used to get high. So this is the cannabis plant. And the part that they would take off to use for marijuana would be these parts right here. See the little fuzzy areas? So you're not going to want to smoke the leaves because there is not very much THC there. All the THC is here. Excuse my voice. Hash also comes from the marijuana plant, and it's actually made. So it's made from the resin of the sativa plant. So it comes from the trichomes. The marijuana, which is smoked, comes from here. Hash also comes from here, but it has to be processed. And so what hash is, it's basically the trichomes extracted from the plant and then they're compressed, and that compression makes, like, they form it into a brick, and that is hash, that block. I don't have a picture for you, but you can look it up. It's usually compressed. All of those trichomes are compressed together to make hash. So hash basically still comes from the plant. It's just a product of that plant. Synthetic cannabinoids, these are created completely in the lab. They do not contain any THC, but they do mimic the effects of marijuana and act on cannabinoid receptors. It can be added or sprayed to plant matter and smoked and or vaped. So basically, if somebody has like a plant-like substance, they can spray this on there and then they could smoke it just like weed. So remember, synthetic cannabinoids, they mimic the effects of weed, but they do not contain THC. THC comes from the cannabis plant. Here are some pictures of synthetic cannabinoids. Do know that sometimes it's really hard to tell whether this is actual, but I mean, they can't sell it as actual weed. They do have to say it's synthetic, but these are pretty dangerous because you never know what chemicals are used to make them. Whereas the plant, you know exactly what the contents of the plants are. I'll let you go through that history on your own. Administration routes of cannabis. The most common is inhalation, smoked as a joint, blunt, or hookah, or vaped. Taken orally, it's added to foods, beverages, taken in pill form. So as far as absorption, inhaled you get 50% from cannabis and 80% from e-liquids. If taken orally, it can take up to 2 hours to peak. So it takes a long time when you take anything orally, remember, because it has to go through a whole process, right? Through your whole GI tract and liver and everything else. 25 to 30% of THC reaches the bloodstream due to first pass. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And is excreted through the feces and urine. It can stay in the system for up to 14 days. And with chronic use, THC can actually remain in the system for up to 30 days. That means if Johnny smokes weed every day for a year, he will have to go weed-free for a month to get a negative test result. So first pass metabolism. This is where the drug becomes less potent before it reaches the systemic circulation. Like it's a watered down version of itself before it goes into circulation. This can happen in the GI tract, which includes the stomach and intestines, lung and liver, where the bioavailability is reduced. So if someone eats a weed brownie, it goes to the GI tract, which includes the stomach and the intestines, broken down in the liver, This is where first pass happens. It lowers the potency because it's broken down from the enzymes, and then about 50% enters the brain. If THC is inhaled, it goes through the lungs directly into the brain. It doesn't go through all this. It doesn't get broken down by these enzymes that are in the liver. Endocannabinoids help the body stay in balance. They are endogenous neurotransmitters, which means that they come from within our body. They work on cannabinoid receptors. Endocannabinoids include AEA, which is responsible for managing pain and immune system, and 2AG. You know, when you're working out, you start feeling really good. It's kind of like a high. That's that 2AG. The endocannabinoid system consists of three components. This is where the effects of THC and other psychoactive cannabinoid compounds are experienced. So there's endocannabinoids, there's receptors, and there's enzymes. Endocannabinoids are responsible for activating the endocannabinoid system. And we talked about the two main endos. The receptors are found throughout the body. They bind to CB1 and CB2 receptors. You can find that in this diagram here. CB1 is found primarily in the CNS, brain and spinal cord, and in peripheral organs. It helps with short-term memory, pain, thinking, motor activity, coordination, and some immunity. CB2 is found primarily outside of the brain and in the immune system, and mainly helps reduce inflammation. The physiological effects of THC include increased heart rate, red eyes due to swelling of blood vessels, increased appetite. People get the munchies when they're high. No, that's that THC. So studies have found THC to impair memory and attention and psychomotor control. So chronic use will lead to reduced release of acetylcholine and GABA in the hippocampus, which may result in problems with memory, learning, word finding, muscle tone, things like that. Correlational studies, which means that there's an association with chronic use and poor academic performance, lower IQ, poor working memory, and slower processing. For those who have smoked weed, they will notice that they'll seem to be moving in slow motion, have a hard time computing conversations or what someone just said to them. They might experience a long period of blankness, like visualizing just nothing, sitting there blank. Cannabis can also cause paranoia, also cause delusions and hallucinations, but the latter is usually caused by synthetic cannabis or when the weed is laced with other substances like meth, coke, or heroin, or whatever they might put in it. Because these type of symptoms, those who are vulnerable to developing schizophrenia actually have a higher chance of actually getting schizophrenia. DSM-5-TR cannabis use disorder. So this falls under the category of substance use disorder. Someone is considered to have this disorder if within a 12-month period there's presence of at least 2 symptoms on this list accompanied by significant impairment of functioning and distress. So with anything in the DSM, some of us might have gone through the DSM, looked at the symptoms, and said, oh my God, I fit this description. I have a lot of these symptoms. I must have this disorder. Well, the thing with the DSM is you can't really call something a disorder until, for most of the diagnoses, until it's causing functional impairment and or distress, which means I'm having problems at school, I'm having problems socially, I'm having problems with work and or at home. And it's causing me a lot of distress, which means it's making me really anxious. I'm having anxiety or I'm having some type of emotional change because of the use of this. So if somebody just smokes regularly and doesn't express any of these symptoms, then we can't really diagnose them with cannabis use disorder, okay? Difficulty containing use, using larger amounts than needed, repeated failed attempts to discontinue use, a significant amount of time used to obtain, use, or recover from the effects. Using is more important than other areas of life, craving or desires, continued use despite adverse consequences, tolerance, and withdrawal. This means within this year, this person has had at least 2 symptoms on this list. Somebody who is using and they need more and more and more, and or they try to quit, but or stop smoking as much, but they can't do it. They really can't. It's really affecting them. It's causing them a lot of distress, or a significant of their time or day is used to try to get the weed. So, like, going to great lengths to scrape up some change just to get some weed. Preferring to get high, maybe getting high is more important than going to school or going to work. So those are two very important areas of life. And if they're ditching school and work all the time just to smoke, then that's a significant issue. I mean, people are late from smoking, right? You're smoking, you're high. Maybe you fell asleep, you get to school late. Now, if this becomes a pattern, then it is a problem. Cravings or desires, the person can't think of anything else. They just want to smoke weed. Maybe they get in trouble, get pulled over because they were high. Weed smell was coming out of their car, or they had just smoked a bowl or whatever and got in the car and got pulled over, and that didn't stop them from smoking before they left the house. Most of us, like, there's consequences. We kind of learn our lesson and then we try to be careful not to do it next time, or maybe we make the same offense the second time, but we are pretty sure not to make it a third offense. If it continues to become a problem, then they would fall under this category. Or tolerance. So smoking more than before and it has the same effect. Or withdrawals, not smoking it and having, like, the shakes, or depression, anxiety, not being able to cope because they stopped smoking it. So if they have 2 or more of these on the list within a 12-month period, and it's followed by significant distress or impairment in functioning, like functioning again would be they're not able to go to school because they were so high, or they had to call out of work, or when they're at work, they can't pay attention, they're not getting their work done, or they're making mistakes. Health risks, I'll let you go over that on your own. Medical cannabis is used for alleviating side effects from chemo, like it helps reduce nausea and pain. It helps increase appetite for those people who need to gain weight. It helps alleviate pain. It can reduce the frequency of seizures. Do know that yes, cannabis is legal in California. It's not deemed for medical use or approved by the FDA. Even though you can go get your weed card, or I don't even know if that's still a thing, but that was legal, but it wasn't prescribed. So that's why it's still Schedule 1, because it hasn't been deemed by the FDA to have medical treatment success. So in the US, it's not prescribed by medical doctors, right? It might be suggested, but the doctor isn't going to like write a script and have you go pick up weed at the pharmacy. There's no solid evidence that shows cannabis effectively treats cancers. Although it helps symptoms, it doesn't show that it actually treats the cancer. It just helps with cancer symptoms. That's very huge. That's like if pregnant, the medication that helps you not be nauseous doesn't make you not be pregnant anymore. It just helps with the symptoms for the mom to not be nauseous. What is FDA approved includes Ch11, that contains THC and is used for nausea and appetite, and Epidiolex, which contains CBD and is used to treat seizures. Here is a table of medical uses for cannabis. I'll let you go over this on your own. And that's all, folks.